Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the two individual executive member decisions today. My name's Callum Wernham. I'm a Democratic and Electoral Services Specialist, and I'll be clerking the meeting. Making the decisions today will be Councillor Lindsay Ferris, who is our executive member for planning and the local plan. Officer-wise, we have Ian Bellinger, who's the service manager for growth and delivery, and James McCabe, who's a senior planning officer within the growth and delivery team. And James, can I ask you to take us through the first IMD, which is the one relating to the West Berkshire pre-submission local plan?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks very much, Callum. So the first item on the agenda is effectively WBC's response to West Berkshire's pre-submission local plan consultation. So that's effectively the last stage of consultation in the plan making process before it's then submitted to the Secretary of State and then on for an independent examination. So that this is the end of a kind of long process over a number of years of previous engagement and consultation, which WBC have inputted into. So broadly speaking, the recommendation in the response is to acknowledge that the plan would have limited cost boundary implications for working Borough Council. But just to cover off briefly some of the detail behind that. So in terms of the spatial strategy within the plan, the majority of growth is focused really around Newbury and northeast of Station. There's an extension to Newbury and then also a kind of northeast extension to Thatcham. So both those kind of proposals around 1,500 dwellings each. Obviously some distance away from the boundary. Overall, in terms of housing need, the plan seeks to oversupply against the local housing need as calculated by the government standard method by around 400 dwellings. So in that respect, it's doing what government policy asks of it. So there's flexibility there as well. In terms of this has been kind of documented elsewhere. There's a very modest unmet need from Reading Borough Council, and it was adopted back in 2019. The recommendation is that we seek West Berkshire just kind of acknowledge within its plan via a modification that the additional buffer and kind of flexibility within the plan would be capable of meeting that, accommodating at least some of that unmet need, which is an approach similar to us taken with the recently examined Bracknell local plan. In terms of gypsy and traveller provision, so the plan allocates a site which would meet travel and show person need in full. It also allocates a site for gypsy and travellers for around 8 pitches, which wouldn't on its own meet the overall need for 30 pitches in full, but there is also a kind of criteria-based policy that any subsequent plan application would be assessed against, which would have reasonable certainty would meet a good degree of that need. West Berkshire have actually committed to their updated local development scheme. They'll be producing a separate gypsy and traveller plan, which will look at allocating more sites and having a wider policy framework to meet those needs. So while we can't be certain at this stage that the plan as consulted on at the moment would meet all gypsy and traveller needs in full, there's high likelihood through that future process that it would do so. The recommendation is to support that additional work. The other main issue really is around employment need. So West Berkshire, they've identified a significant unmet need in terms of office floor space of around 50,000 square metres. They aren't proposing any allocations to meet it. That just hasn't been implemented effectively. And while the plan is proposing to allocate around 50,000 square metres of industrial floor space, there would still be an additional unmet need of around 32,000. So separately to this consultation, West Berkshire has actually written to Wokingham Borough and other authorities to seek assistance in meeting that need. And our response has effectively been that we're not in a position to do that. That's kind of reiterating the response. But otherwise, the report goes into some other issues which may be of interest to members and members of the public, which I won't go into detail on, but those are the key potential cost boundary implications that recommendations that we're seeking to make on those.
Thank you, James, for your comments. I do have a couple of questions, or a number of questions that I would just like to put. I understand there may be problems with West Berkshire Council progressing their Regulation 19 consultation. There was certainly information within the Newbury Times last week, which I just like to have clarification on before we progress.
Yeah, sure. So effectively, yeah, there has been a motion to consider whether a pause should be made to the production of the plan. So going back slightly in terms of decision was made by full council at West Berkshire to consult on the Reg 19 plan back in December. Kind of subsequent to that, the government was probably aware, consulted on changes to the NPPF and the planning system. So it's been suggested by some members that West Berkshire should kind of reconsider how it might want to progress its plan. But effectively, the comments as officers, we've reviewed the plan as it's been consulted on and commented on that basis. If kind of subsequent to that, West Berkshire decide that they want to undertake further Reg 19 consultation in the future, then we'd respond at that stage. All we can do as officers at this stage really is just comment on the plan as consulted upon. I guess we'll await the outcome of that motion once it's discussed. I'm not 100% sure on the timing of the motion, but the consultation closes on the 3rd. So yeah, if it's before then or after then, the consultation may have closed by the time it gets to that point.
Okay, right. Well, I think that what we probably need to say is subject to them not doing anything, so we can only progress with it as it is at the moment. And if they should subsequently pause their regulation and consultation, and no doubt it may come back. So on that basis, I'm happy to proceed that we will be proposing what we have here. I've got some other points. Within Woking and Borough, we recently had an appeal decision on a site that was covered by the AWE restriction zone that was approved, and I'd just like to understand whether we feel that has any potential impact on what may very well happen within either West Berks or other.
Yeah, sure. So so this is the Kingfisher Grove appeal, which was approved a few weeks ago now in the detailed emergency plan zone around AWE Burfield. So that was for 49 dwellings. I think the first point to note really is that slightly surprising decision that it's at odds with all previous decisions that we've had from the planning inspector on applications within the detailed emergency plan zone. So what we've been doing is we've been engaging with emergency planners at West Berkshire, which is the authority who's in charge of the emergency plan around that facility, and also been talking with AWE, the representatives of the facility itself and the MOD. As far as we're concerned, it doesn't set a precedent for future decisions. The advice that we're getting from emergency planners is that they would still very much object to applications that would come forward within that area, and of course it's kind of usual. As usual, these decisions can be potentially legally challenged, and it's within their gift to do that if they felt that was necessary. So, from an implications point of view, we don't see that it would change our approach to development within that area until we hear otherwise, basically.
On that, do we think the MOD or AWE will appeal or challenge?
Allow me. It's possible, but we don't know yet at the moment. So our engagement has been with West Berkshire District Council, as James says, in terms of the owner of the offsite emergency plan. But we've also been engaging with AWE MOD as the operator of the site. We're aware that all those organisations have concerns regarding the decision and are taking their own legal advice as to whether there are legal flaws in the process and whether it will be challenged. They haven't reached that decision yet, but they have a period of 6 weeks from the appeal date. So in the next 2 or 3 weeks, they'll be obliged to make that decision, serve papers if they choose to. But at this stage, the main factor is those organisations are still advising us as the council that they would strongly object to any residential development within that zone, notwithstanding the outcome of this appeal.
Thank you. James, when you spoke, you indicated that there were no cross-boundary issues. Can you just reconfirm that?
Yeah, so the majority of growth is proposed around sort of Newbury Thatcham areas, and that's obviously some distance away from our borough. The plan itself is supported by transport modelling evidence, infrastructure delivery plan around that as well. And the key kind of impacts on the junction in terms of transport, etc., are around those larger sites, and that's where kind of interventions, etc., are focused. But beyond, and obviously we will, as developments come forward at the application stage as well, we have additional understanding of what the potential impacts might be. We'd have that opportunity to input that stage as well. But in terms of growth near to our borough and implications, we don't perceive that there are any significant ones which would have a negative impact.
Thank you. It does mention within the report that there's that the West Berkshire has a shortfall on the employment need front. And I believe we've indicated that we're not in a position to assist on that front. Have you got any more comments on that?
Just to say really that so our own employment evidence, our published evidence basically predated the COVID pandemic, and a few other kind of changes in kind of change. So COVID being the key one. So we are still in the process of finalising and updating our own employment needs evidence. So once that's in place, we'll understand what the scale of the challenge for us is in terms of facilitating our own needs through the local plan update. But at the moment, we can't say that we would be in a position to assist West Berkshire because the emerging evidence is consistent with our published evidence that we have our own significant needs for those kind of uses.
If I could just add briefly, it's not unusual in the South East for a local authority to struggle to meet its employment needs, in that whilst a lot of land tends to be promoted for housing development, comparatively little land gets promoted for office and industrial floor space. And West Berkshire are having an issue where very few pieces of land are published to be available and insufficient to meet their need. And that situation is the same as here, where we have comparatively little promoted to us. And indeed, in Bracknell, who have just been going through their examination, they've had a similar situation, that the need is higher than the land that's deemed suitable promoted to them also. In that circumstance, in Bracknell circumstance, the inspectors examining their plans have given their post-hearing letter, and they're satisfied that the council has taken the necessary steps to try and identify that land. And that's largely, I suspect, what West Berkshire are looking to do here. And clearly, if a solution does present itself, then that's excellent, and West Berkshire will be able to enter into some form of agreement to help meet that need. But the likely outcome, I might suggest, would be that they check whether there is scope in neighbouring local authorities, and there is not, and therefore their examination inspector is able to be satisfied that they've tried their best to find a solution.
And that doesn't have an impact on hearing.
Not to us, as James says, we although our data is yet to be absolutely confirmed, the initial results we have suggest we're in exactly the same situation, where we have an employment need which is theoretically higher than the land supply promoted to us. So we certainly don't have the scope to offer West Berkshire or any other local authority assistance, and that's been communicated at an officer level. But the response to this consultation will reinforce that with your inputs.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have no other questions or issues, and as a result of that, I am happy to proceed.
Thanks, Lindsay. So just on your first comment about you just wanted to put in an extra point about just to clarify that we are responding to the current consultation. So I wondered if we put in a point 6 that said something along the lines of agrees that Wokingham Borough Council considers amended or additional responses should West Berkshire District Council
would consider,
yeah.
I think that's an indication that we've taken account that they might be doing something.
I might suppose a counter proposal potentially, as in there's a question. The court is a consultation report to this
Yeah,
consultation
absolutely.
specific. However, we could certainly provide clarification that we would certainly engage in future consultation should that change in a covering email or letter.
Yeah, maybe that's
So-
rather than a recommendation then. So I think
So are you happy just with what's in the?
yes, and then what we can put in the response just to say that if you do send another one, then obviously we would respond to that one.
So we could put something in Ian about that Woking Borough Council would continue engagement with. How would you word it?
Within the recommendation, we could
Point 6 could be something like along the lines of what you just said about that continuing engagement. If
we could certainly say Woking Borough confirms it would be willing to further engagement regarding their local plan process as it progresses, which is a very generic point.
Yeah.
We'd be obliged to do that under legislation in any instance, but we could certainly make that.
Yeah,
Make
that,
that clear.
that point that
Yeah.
indicates and
okay, just quickly add that in. Right, so I'll just read out the recommendation, which is set out on agenda page 5. It is that the executive member for planning and the local plan agrees that Woking Borough Council supports West Berkshire District Council's approach to meeting their local housing need in full. Requests West Berkshire District Council acknowledge that the plan contains flexibility to assist with meeting the existing unmet housing need from Reading Borough. Expresses concern over whether the plan will meet gypsy and traveller needs in full, but welcomes the commitment to addressing this through a separate development plan document. Confirms that Woking Borough Council is currently unable to assist with meeting any unmet employment need arising from the plan. Expects that West Berkshire District Council will work closely with Woking Borough Council to ensure appropriate infrastructure is delivered to mitigate the impact of any development which would have cross-boundary implications, and a new recommendation 6, which is welcomes further engagement as West Berkshire District Council's local plan progresses. So on that basis, Lindsay, are you happy to sign that decision sheet?
I'm happy to do so.
Do that. So subject to the standard 5-day cooling period, that decision will go live. We now move on to the second IMD, which is regarding the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill reforms to national planning policy consultation proposals. I believe I'm handing over to Ian for this one.
Thank you. I'm very happy to give a brief introduction. So as set out in the report, the government has published a consultation on proposed reforms to the national planning policy. The focus of the proposals relate by and large to planning for housing. However, there are a range of other matters including the scope of national development management policies that are proposed to be introduced with the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, as well as other matters such as energy infrastructure. The enclosure to the report sets out a recommended response to the 58 consultation questions, which I don't intend to go through in full, but just to highlight a couple of more key areas to Wokingham Borough. The proposals include changes as to how the forward-looking 5-year housing land supply test and the backward-looking housing delivery test operate. In terms of the former, the proposed changes include the introduction of the ability to take account of past over delivery when calculating the housing figure against which performance of a local authority is assessed. This is not the case now, and is the reason why Wokingham Borough Council is unable to demonstrate a sufficient forward-looking supply over the coming 5 years. So our issue is not to do with the lack of granting planning permissions and land, but in fact the opposite, in that our land is being built out ahead of when was projected, so we're ahead of the curve. In terms of other proposals, the proposals also include changes that would introduce flexibilities to whether an authority needed to meet housing need. The emphasis is still very much on meeting housing need. However, there are 3 defined flexibilities, which are where meeting need would require development at density significantly out of character with the existing area, where meeting need would require land to be released from the green belt, and where there is clear evidence of past over delivery of housing against the existing adopted plan requirements. That last flexibility is of particular relevance to Wokingham Borough, with, as I've mentioned, the housing delivery in the past exceeding the planned requirement in the between 2006 and 2022. The exceedance was 1,727 dwellings. The last change I was just going to briefly comment on also relates to housing need, in that the change is proposed so that any unmet housing need from a local authority subject to the urban uplift within the national standard method will be changed so that that uplift is not expected to be exported to other areas. And the reason I highlight that is that Reading Borough Council is one of those local authorities which is subject to that urban uplift. So the percentage uplift to their figures is one where it would not be expected to be exported out to a local authority and sort of a countryside location, which is something we recommend welcoming. I appreciate that's a rather brief introduction, only covers a few of the multitude of questions, but I'd be very happy to take any questions you might have.
Yes, certainly. I would say that the vast majority of what is being proposed in these changes are either something that will be beneficial or suitable, or at least not cause us any adverse effects. Is that your opinion as well?
It is. So I would agree. Most of the changes I think are broadly sensible in direction. Some detailed comments are recommended as always on the precise detail. But I would agree, and indeed I would say that a number of changes are indeed potentially very beneficial to the environment.
Yes, there was one that I have also added in from my perspective. That's the housing buffer, which is also the changes that are proposed would be beneficial, although they would be less of a volume than the 1727 that was mentioned. It is still helpful not to have a housing buffer, whether it's 5 or whatever percent included on top. So that I think that's just helps additional as well. And I think that a very comprehensive response has been put together here. It has been through the cross-party working group. We've had comments and from wider to the members as well. So all groups have had an opportunity to input, and I'm very pleased to say that, as far as I can see, there's no negative comments from anywhere on that for us to be now response in. So I am very happy to proceed.
Thank you very much. So again, I'll just read out the recommendation. This is for the Levelling Up Regeneration Bill reforms to National Planning Policy Consultation Proposals, IMD. is set out on agenda page 5, and it is that the executive member for planning and local plan agrees that Woking Borough Council submit the comments contained in enclosure 1 as this council's response to the government consultation, levelling up and regeneration bill, reforms to national planning policy, December 2022. Are you happy to make that decision, Lindsay?
I concur.
Just sign the sheet again. Thank you very much. So again, as with the first IMD, subject to the standard 5-day cooling period, the decision can be enacted upon. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you very much.